But we begin tonight, nearly 3 years since an army of MAGA extremists laid siege to the U.S. Capitol at the direction of Donald Trump in a final attempt to hold on to his seat of power. Since then, we have learned a lot about the confluence of events leading up to that day and what occurred on the day itself. But one aspect that continues to be shrouded in some mystery was Trump's bizarre efforts to get to the Capitol and join the very people he unleashed on Congress. You might remember Cassidy Hutchinson's bombshell testimony to the January 6th committee last year, recounting what she was told by Trump's deputy chief of staff, Tony Ornato, on January 6th about Trump's aggressive insistence on going to the Capitol.
I looked at Tony and he had said, "Did you effing hear what happened in the Beast?" The president said something to the effect of, "I'm the effing president. Take me up to the Capitol now." The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Engel grabbed his arm, said, "Sir, you need to take your hand off the steering wheel." Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel. And when Mr. Ornato had recounted this story to me, he had motioned towards his clavicles.
Trump denied trying to grab the steering wheel or lunging at his lead Secret Service agent. But NBC News has obtained a new audio recording of Trump speaking with ABC's Jonathan Karl back in March of 2021, talking about how the Secret Service stopped him from going to the Capitol that day.
But if you look at the real size of that crowd, it was never reported correctly. It's the biggest crowd I've ever spoken in front of by far.
Really?
By far. That went down to that went back to the Washington Monument.
You told them you were going to go up to the Capitol. Were you just...
I was going to, and the Secret Service said, you can't. And then by the time I would have, and then when I got back, I wanted to go back. I was thinking about going back during the problem to stop the problem, doing it myself. Secret Service didn't like that idea too much.
So what?
I could have done that, and you know what? I would have been very well received. Don't forget, the people that went to Washington that day, in my opinion, they went because they thought the election was rigged. That's why they went.
Wonder why they thought that. And by the way, in case you missed it, let me just read again what Trump said regarding when he returned to the White House after his rally. Quote, "I said I wanted to go back. I was thinking about going back during the problem to stop the problem, doing it myself." Who knew Trump was so concerned about the insurrection? It is hard to believe, given that everything we know about Trump's actions or inactions that day contradicts what Trump told Jonathan Karl. You know, the 187 minutes between Trump finishing his rally speech and when he finally put out a video telling his supporters to leave the Capitol, but not before telling them that he loves them and that they are very special. In fact, from what we know, he just sat there for 3 hours watching the television coverage, unwilling to listen to the countless pleas coming from his White House staff members, members of Congress who were under attack, various Fox primetime hosts, and even his own family members.
Did you ever hear the president
No.
ask for the National
No.
Guard? Did you ever hear the president ask for law enforcement response?
No.
Did you continue, Mr. Cipollone, throughout the period of time up until 4/17, continue, you and others, to push for a stronger statement?
Yes.
Were you joined in that effort by Ivanka Trump?
Yes.
Eric Hershey?
Yes.
By Mark Meadows?
Yes.
You know, I asked Kevin McCarthy, who's the Republican leader, about this, and he said he called Donald Trump. He finally got through to Donald Trump, and he said, "You have got to get on TV. You've got to get on Twitter. You've got to call these people off." And the president's response to Kevin, to me, was chilling. He said, "Well, Kevin, I guess they're just more upset about the election, theft than you are."
Recently, NBC's Kristen Welker gave Trump an opportunity to clear it all up.
Tell me how you watched this all unfold. Were you in the dining room watching TV?
I'm not going to tell you. I'll tell people later at an appropriate time.
Did you call military or law enforcement at the moment the Capitol was under attack?
I'm not going to tell you anything. Let me put it this way. I behaved so well. I did such a good job.
Yeah, Trump actually believes he deserves a gold star for how well he behaved that day. And given that Trump has claimed that he would absolutely testify at his criminal trials, I wonder if his federal election interference trial will be the appropriate time to explain these quite contradictory things, especially if he believed that he could have stopped the insurrection if he wanted to. Joining me now is Charles Coleman Jr., former prosecutor and MSNBC legal analyst, and Hugo Lowell, political investigations reporter for The Guardian. Thank you both for being here. Charles, I do want to start with you because I'm going to read it again. I said I wanted to go back. I was thinking about going back during the problem to stop the problem and doing it myself. So obviously, Donald Trump believes that he had influence over the crowd. Now let me play you what convicted insurrectionist rioter Stephen Ayers told the January 6th committee about when he would have left and why he would have left the Capitol. Take a listen.
As soon as that come out, everybody started talking about it, and it seemed like it started to disperse basically when President Trump put his tweet out. We literally left right after that come out. To me, if he would have done that earlier in the day, 1:30, we wouldn't be in this. Maybe we wouldn't be in this bad of a situation or something.
It seems to me that he has essentially now admitted that he had some control over the crowd. At least that's what he seems to be admitting. And he seems to be kind of corroborating what Cassidy Hutchinson told the January 6th committee about his insistence to the Secret Service that he go to the Capitol. All of this does not seem good if you're a defendant in a trial like the January 6th case. Your thoughts?
Joy, I'd agree with you, and I'd also point out that the same things that you noticed during your reading are the same things that I noticed as I was listening and watching. Namely, when Donald Trump said, for example, that he believed that the people there were there because they thought it was a rigged election, the immediate thought that I had was, well, how did they get that thought? They got that thought because this was something that you were pushing. And now, if you combine that and you combine the notion of you knowing that, or you believing and openly stating that you believe you would be well received if you would go into the Capitol, and acknowledging that there was a problem, that's also key language when he says during the problem. That's also key language because he's at that point admitting that we're not dealing with a protest. We're not dealing with people who are using their First Amendment right to disagree. We're dealing with rioters. So the fact that he used that language, all of that combined does not bode well for him continuing to have the defense that he has in this case.
You know, and Hugo Lowell, that would make Donald Trump the only person anywhere near the Capitol, Democrat or especially Republican, who thought the crowd would receive him well. Every Republican ran, including Josh Fist Up Hawley, who threw the fist up to them, but then ran like hell from them, including people like Matt Gaetz. All of them evacuated. Jim Jordan, people who were down with the whole madness, but they ran. He seems to think he wouldn't have had to run. Around Donald Trump, are any of his lawyers getting nervous, or are any in Trump world getting nervous that he seems to be admitting to the whole thing Scooby-Doo villain style?
Yeah, I think it's a tacit admission that Trump knew the people at the Capitol, the people storming in the Capitol, were his people, and that he had a lot of influence over them, whether to send them to the Capitol. You know, that was the language he used at the Ellipse rally speech. He said, I'm going to march with you to the Capitol. And then for him to come away from the whole January 6th incident, days or weeks later and say, well, I could have actually stopped it as well because effectively they're his people, I think is a really big admission. And it's the kind of thing that defense lawyers and his team in particular have been very wary about him saying. They've been trying to limit him talking about the January 6th case in particular, especially, now that he's been indicted. This was an audio interview that happened a couple of years ago, but his team now are trying to stop him from making these sorts of admissions because it is the sort of thing that Jack Smith, the special counsel, will take up and use against him at trial.
I will note that Judge Tanya Chutkan has rejected Donald Trump's team's request to strike references to the January 6th violence from his indictment because, again, owning the violence and saying he could have stopped it does seem to me as an admission as an admission that is against his own interests. Speaking of trying to get him to stop saying words, there is for now a stay on the gag order in the federal election interference case, Charles Coleman Jr. There is an appeal to the Supreme Court pending. Apparently, Trump has indicated he would like to go to the Supreme Court, his friends, his appointees on the Supreme Court, to try to do that. But I will note, and I'm just going to put it up on the screen, since that stay has happened, he has unleashed a barrage of attacks again, attacking the law clerk again, Judge Engoron's law clerk, attacking Judge Engoron. going on and on and on and on and on. And this after Judge Engoron denied Trump's request for a mistrial. Your thoughts on the fact that the mistrial was denied and that the gag order, immediately upon him it being lifted, he went right back in?
Well, listen, Joy, I'm not surprised at either of those things. I knew that the mistrial was more than likely going to be denied. People file for mistrials in the midst of trials all the time. They are seldom, if ever, successful unless there's a clear, hard, and fast rule that has been broken or violated. And so that should come as no surprise to anyone. The fact that they brought the motion itself, I would argue, was frivolous, but it appears that Judge Engoron did not want to go that far. But with respect to the gag order, I'm also not surprised that Donald Trump has gone as far as he has in terms of immediately doubling down with respect to his rhetoric, targeting different individuals. But here's the thing. As we look at the game plan that he has laid out, it's very clear, and it's smart money to bet, that Donald Trump feels very good about his odds should he be able to get before the Supreme Court of the United States of America. And it's very clear that now we see that blueprint laid out pretty plainly as he has already started to make appeals to try to get this there. He is going to try and put the pressure on the courts to get this as far as it can go in terms of getting in front of the Supreme Court so that he can rely on his friends to try to give him carte blanche to say what it is that he wants to say, not only during this civil trial, but using this as a test case for everything else going on in all his other legal matters.